Well, good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. I was glad it wasn't a sub-zero evening. You can never tell the beginning of March or the beginning of April, for that matter. So it's good to see everyone here today to discuss this topic. I'm Amy Turner. I'm the CEO of Fox Islands Electric and Fox Islands Wind. I'm joined tonight by directors from two different boards. For the Fox Islands Wind Board, we have President George Kendrick. He's going to be giving a lot of the presentation tonight on the technical details of solar. And Doug Green, who is our Vice President, and Chuck Gadzik, who's our Secretary Treasurer. And from the Fox Islands Electric Board, Patrick Trainer's here, he's our President. Don Young, one of our directors, and Dennis Pratt. And did I miss anyone? I believe that's everyone here tonight. It's good to see so many people interested in this topic. It's definitely one of these conversations that we need to have as we go forward and really decide as a community which direction we would like to go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to George to start the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Amy. So tonight we're going to talk about solar power, and we're going to take a look at solar energy basics. I'm not a physicist, so we're not going to get too deep into the physics of how they work, but we are going to talk a bit about technology, and I'm going to be going pretty quickly through a lot of that. We're going to talk about rooftop solar and ground mount solar, what they are, how they work, how they perform, particularly how they perform here on the Fox Islands. Amy's going to step in and explain net energy metering and how it works specifically with the co-op. Then we're going to talk a little bit about solar with battery storage. Remember last month we had a conversation about battery storage as a whole. We're going to drill down and talk a little bit about how batteries work with solar. And then we're going to do two case studies. We're going to look at a rooftop solar project in the Fox Islands and a ground mount solar. And we're going to get into the details because we ran a bunch of modeling and actually looked at all the details of generation on month to month and hour to hour. And we're going to walk you through all of that. So the first thing is to distinguish solar energy. We have two kinds of solar energy that most people think about. There's solar thermal and solar photovoltaic, or PV. And they're different technologies and they capture different forms of energy. So solar thermal, a lot of you may be accustomed to seeing solar thermal systems on roofs that basically provide hot water, domestic hot water, or they might even supplement some of your heating systems in your house. There's also concentrated solar that takes solar energy, reflects it in mirrors, and heats a liquid, usually water, and that can be used to generate power as well, usually on a very large scale system. And the third one is solar photovoltaic, or PV, which everybody is accustomed to. And that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight is PV. So when I say PV, it's photovoltaics. So how does it work? So the concepts of photovoltaics are PV panels use semiconductors to convert sunlight into electricity. And the sun hits the panel and it generates electron movement between positive and negative semiconductor layers that produces a current. And that current is captured. And the panels are typically silicon. That's what most people who have rooftop solar are used to. There's other elements, phosphorus and boron and cadmium and things like that, but the dominant is silicon. So one of the most important things to keep in mind is that the maximum photovoltaic generation is in full sun. And it's most efficient when the sun is actually perpendicular to the PV panel. So the sun hitting at 90 degrees to the panel generates the most amount of power. Unfortunately, when we live in the northern latitudes, the sun is much lower in the wintertime and it's high in the summertime. And in the winter, sometimes we're looking at an 18-degree or maybe a 20-degree angle. And if your panels are at a certain elevation or a certain angle and the sun is at a low angle, you're not generating the maximum amount of power because it's not at 90 degrees. So in the summer, the optimum angle is about 41 degrees on vinyl paper. And in the wintertime, the optimum angle is about 18 degrees. And in the summer, 64. If you have a roof, you can't change the pitch of your roof. And so whatever your roof is whatever you're going to get for power generation.
May I interrupt real quickly? If you have any questions online, if you don't mind, I can't quite hear when you're unmuting. If you could type it into chat, we'll make sure we get to those questions. Thank you.
So for ground mount systems, because it's fixed, you have to pick in Maine what you think is going to be the optimal angle for generating the most amount of power over the entire year. And in Maine, that's typically between 30 and 45 degrees. And it's really important to remember that there are also seasonal effects. So we talked about the sun angle changing during the year. We also have variation in hours of daylight. So in January, we're looking at about 9 hours of daylight per day. And in June and July, we're looking at about 15 hours. So that's a dramatic difference in the amount of potential energy that's coming. And a solar array then can generate more power in the summer than it does in the winter, simply because we have more sun, we have longer days. But weather's a factor also. So if we have clouds or rain or fog or snow, those can reduce the generation of panels. So this chart that's up here right now, in yellow, those are the number of daylight hours each month. And you can see that in January, we've got, maybe 9 hours of daylight. And in June, we're up around 15. But an important point here is that although June has the longest days, it doesn't actually have the most amount of sunshine. And some of that is because of weather. So this data that we're looking at here is actually based on about 25 years of weather data from NOAA, looking at things like clouds and storms and fog. And we have more of that in the late spring and in early summer than we do in the late summer and in the fall. So actually there's a shift. The red here is the actual sunshine hours, as opposed to the yellow bars, which are daylight. And you can see there's a shift, that the sunshine is actually greater in July and August than it is in May and June, even though the longer days are in June. I know everybody who lives here knows that intuitively, but this is the actual data that it is true. And then, of course, the rain and fog plays a factor. So one of the things that we use as a tool is the National Renewable Energy Lab's radiation database. And it's a national database that has thousands of weather stations across the country and decades of data. And it has information on actual solar radiation and cloud cover and fog. And it allows you to look at the actual solar radiation hitting a particular spot. And this is the map of the United States that shows the annual solar radiance, the actual solar energy hitting the ground. And no big surprise here, the big red spots and purple spots are in the Southwest US, where it's sunny a lot of the time. And the Northeast and Washington State, Western Washington have the lowest amounts. Again, not a big surprise, but if we drill into the Northeast, you can see that the Northeast is pretty consistent in the average levels of radiation across the entire region. And we don't have any bright orange or red zones here. So what that does is there's fewer sunny days. We have lower sun angles and shorter days in the winter than you do in the Southwest. And then we've got the fog and clouds on top of that. So we have less solar potential than one has in Arizona, for example. And the good news, I guess, for everybody living a little north of us is North Haven has a smidge more sunshine than Vinyl Haven. And that's actually, we have the data to prove it. It's not just an urban legend here. So let's take a look at the actual radiation. This chart is the actual solar energy that's hitting the ground each month on Vinyl Haven. And it's measured in kilowatt hours per square meter. And that translates directly into the amount of energy that we can generate from solar panels. And the solar production in our area, the PV panels, electricity production, varies greatly from month to month. And as we just talked about, it's related to the amount of sunshine and the amount of hours of daylight. So you can see in January, we have a lot less solar radiation hitting the ground. And in the summer, there's a lot more. And we're going to take a closer look at actual PV electricity production from Vinyl Haven a little bit later. And we actually have data from a number of folks who gave us their data from the Fox Islands that have solar installations, so we could benchmark against our modeling. We have real data as well as model data. Okay, so let's take a look at the panel technology. I'll go through this pretty quickly. There are two basic PV panel types. There's a thin film, which, as you'd expect, has thinner layers. It's lighter weight, a little bit less efficient. It's made of cadmium telluride, which is not a great thing to be playing around with, but that's the way it is. That's what they use. And these are often used for larger utility scale projects because they're less expensive and they're lighter weight and they're easy to install. The second type are monocrystalline. These are the ones that most people use on their roofs. They're also used in many land-based ground mount projects, and they're heavier, a little more costly. They're more efficient. They last longer. And again, they're used for most of the rooftop systems. So if we're looking at panels, there are a number of things we need to keep in mind. If we on the Fox Islands are ever looking at a solar project, we need to think about this. The kind of panel we select has a number of factors. One of them is the power rating. How many watts of electricity can this panel produce? The second thing is efficiency. How efficient is the panel at actually taking the sunshine and converting it to electricity? And the one thing about the power rating, about 10 years ago, most panels were rated at about 150 to 180 watts. Most panels that you have on roofs around here and are typically sold are about 300 to 310 watts. But the new panels coming out now, the best ones are in the 600 watt range. So just like your laptops, get more and more powerful every few years, the panels appear to be following this pattern with higher efficiencies and more watts coming out of the same square feet. So I think if we took many of the roofs that have panels installed now and put on brand new panels, they would double their power. The other thing is, what's the warranty? Most panels have a 20 to 30 year warranty. And that's great. There's no moving parts on these panels. And they are designed to last a long time. They're glass. And there are a lot of panels that have been up for a very long time but are still generating electricity. Bad news is the technology improves so much that a panel could become obsolete relative to a brand new panel's output in less than the warranty period. So you got to make a decision, a cost decision, on whether you keep your panel for the entire warranty period, or whether at some point you say, maybe I should reinvest and upgrade and put on new panels to generate even more power. The last thing is performance degradation. And this is something that all panels experience. Their actual production degrades over time. The materials actually, they don't wear out from moving parts, but the reactions and the flow of electrons and everything else inside the panel becomes less efficient over time. The best ones lose about less than 0.5% per year, which isn't too bad. But at the end of 30 years, here's a chart showing the PV degradation. After 30 years, your panel would only be operating at 89% of its original rating. And those are the best panels. Panels that are cheaper and have worse degradation factors degrade faster. And so you might only end up with 75 or 80% of its original rating. So again, when we're selecting panels, we got to think about that price point versus performance factor, and how long are they going to last and how are they going to perform. Okay, that's more than you ever wanted to know. But there's a couple of other things. If where the panels are made is important to you or important to a project, we need to be aware that most panels today are made in China. And there are a few US-based solar panel manufacturers. First Solar is one, Q-Cells is another. And despite its name, Canadian Solar makes most of its panels in China. And they've come under a lot of pressure with the name, but they've also agreed they're opening a Texas manufacturing plant in 2025. So they will be able to claim domestic content. So if domestic content is important to us or important to somebody putting in a project, they need to think about where are they going to get their panels from, what brand do they want to buy, is that an important factor? The US panels right now are more expensive, they're a little bit less efficient, they're coming up very quickly to meeting the China performance. And some of you know that there were tariffs imposed on Chinese solar panels a few years ago to try and stimulate more domestic production. So it's just something all of us need to think about. Is that an important factor as we look at panels that one would want to buy? Last thing, some people have asked about, recycling of these panels. What happens when they reach the end of their life? The good news is that this has been a question asked worldwide. And with the thousands or millions of panels that are out there, there's an entire industry that has sprung up that's doing recycling of panels now. There's a huge plant that opened in Texas a couple of years ago. There's one in Georgia. And they are taking panels. They're getting about 95% of the materials out for recycling. And they're taking all the glass and they're recycling it to make new panels. So I think that's a really good story, that recycling is really increasing for solar panels. And I guess for us, probably the most important thing, the most important factor is the price. And the price per watt is how often these panels are evaluated in terms of cost. This chart shows the cost per watt for, on the left side, a residential PV rooftop project, and on the right side, a utility scale PV project. And there's quite a difference in price between these, mostly due to economy of scale. But the prices have been coming down dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years, mostly due to automated panel technology and just new technology. And right now, the rooftops are averaging right around $3 a watt installed. And a typical project out here on the islands might have 5,600 watts or a little less than 6,000 watts in their roof. So that's about an $18,000 project. In contrast, the utility scale systems are right around $1 a watt. And part of that is because they're on the ground, they're simpler to access. They're having hundreds or thousands of panels installed in a single project rather than just 15 or 20 or 30. So there's the economy of scale. And you'll also see on these charts, the prices came down dramatically in the first 5 years or so, and they've kind of stabilized in the last 5 years. So I don't think we're going to be seeing a dramatic drop in panel prices in the next couple of years, unless there's some dramatic breakthrough in technology. Okay, fixed panels versus tracking panels. Now, has anybody here seen tracking systems for panels or PV panels? Yeah, okay. So if you have a fixed solar panel, like those on a residential roof, they produce varying amounts of power depending on the angle of the sun. We talked about that earlier, and the orientation of the house. So if, for example, your roof is facing east, you're going to generate most of your power in the morning, and then less in the afternoon. If your house faces south or if your roof faces south, your maximum power is going to be at noontime, and a little less in the morning and the afternoon. But with a fixed panel system, and you can't change your house or your roof, you're going to get what you get, when you put up panels. A tracking system puts the same kind of panels on a moving or rotating platform or mount. And these kinds of things, they have motors basically that automatically track the sun as it moves through the sky. And that maintains that optimum angle of the sun hitting the panel so you generate the most amount of power. So they can improve generation by 20 or 30 or sometimes even 40% by keeping the panels oriented to the sun. That's the good news. So again, back to fixed PV, use conventional panels and fixed racks. They're not that expensive. There are no moving parts. There's hardly any maintenance at all. And they're suitable for roofs or ground mounting. And the tracking systems use the same kind of panels. They generate more power, but they're 30 to 50% more expensive. And they also have moving parts, so you have more maintenance. So when you live in a northern climate, you got to think about how much maintenance do you want to do in the wintertime if the motors are breaking, and they're more expensive to begin with. It all comes down to cost versus performance. And then the final thing on the technical side is the limitations of solar. So cloudy or foggy days reduce generation by anywhere from 25 to 50%. And so it's considered intermittent power generation. You're not generating any power at night. And another factor is what's called soiling. And in the desert Southwest, this is mostly dust that accumulates on the panels. And if you get dust on the panels, it cuts down the generation. Now, where we live, the good thing is we have rainfall that cleans off the panels more often than it would in Arizona. So we typically don't have to worry about dust. But what do we have to worry about here in the winter? It's snow. And when snow accumulates on the panels, it will cut the generation as well. If your panels are steep, the snow will often slide off and it won't be a problem. If your roof is more gentle, the snow can accumulate, unless you go up and clean it off with your broom. So some of the tilt angle influences how much the snow accumulates on there. And you got a couple of choices. If the snow's accumulated, you can either wait for a warm day to melt the snow and have it go sliding off, but in the meantime, you're not generating any power, or you can get up there and clean the panels off by hand or by machine. And this picture is at a utility scale site where they actually have machinery that drives up and down the rows of panels and cleans off all the snow. Okay. We okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Oh, we do have a few questions. Why don't we just look and see
It's a good
if they're related? Could you please put George's full name in the chat? I will. It's George C. Kendrick. He is the president of Fox Islands Wind. I'll put that in there. There's someone that said, I declined Chinese panels for security reasons. Choose Korean, then they couldn't supply. Next, a Turkish vendor. Eventually stopped pending better American panels. Yeah, that's really interesting. The supply chain has been affected worldwide by COVID. I'm wondering if that had some of it. There was a comment that says we went with Q cells and they're very happy with them. So, okay, I'm just going to type in your name and then we can keep going. I actually can't figure out how to do that right now. So I'll let you go to keep going and I'm going to pull this off to the side. So look at that. Oh, it is there. Okay.
All right. So we're going to take a look at PV installations on the ground first, and then we're going to talk about rooftop. So most PV installations, and again, I'm saying PV as a shorthand for photovoltaic, most of them are in open areas or in fields, a lot of agricultural fields or farmlands. It takes about 5 to 7 acres per megawatt. And there are lots and lots of rack and mounting options. You can use fixed or tracking mounts. And typically in large scale systems, they are post-driven mounts. So they have augers that go out and they will simply drive posts into the ground, attach racks to it, and then put the panels on top. It goes very fast. It's relatively inexpensive to do. And even after you put in a solar farm, you can still have limited agricultural use around and sometimes underneath the panels. They don't block all of the light from underneath the panels because during the year, the sun changes its angle. And in some places, they're starting to use, they're allowing grazing by livestock in and among the panels. And in fact, there's a bunch of projects that are in the Northeast that are using sheep and goats to actually manage the grass and the vegetation underneath the panels. So it's allowing continued use of the farmland for at least a portion of what the original agriculture was. Okay.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Okay. So again, there are open areas that are fast. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is there are a lot of landfills around the United States that are starting to be used for solar. The bad thing about landfills is that you can't penetrate the cap. And we have one on Vinyl Haven that we're going to talk a little bit about. You can't actually have the ground disturbed on these caps, on these landfill caps. So you can't drill down and auger in and drive posts in to support your panels. You have to use something called a ballast mount. And the arrow here is pointing to a ballast mount. It's simply a concrete pad that the mounts are bolted to. And so you can see the contrast between the two types. The top one is a typical post-driven ground mount, and the lower one is what's typically used on landfills for a ballast mount. Other than that, they're the same kinds of systems and the same kind of panels. It does take slightly longer to build, and it costs more because of the different mounts. But it is a good use of a land area that otherwise would be unusable. And there's a number of examples of those around. I'll just go through them quickly. This is Hudson, Massachusetts, was one of the earlier ones. It's a 6 megawatt system. It was put in 2016. Here's one from South Portland. That was done about 3 years ago, I think it was, 4.7 megawatts. This one was just opened this fall in Falmouth, and that's a 1.1 megawatt system. And that's about a comparable size to most small town landfills. So it's a proven technology. There's a whole bunch of steps involved that are a lot of permitting and engineering has to be done, but it is a feasible thing to use to reuse those kinds of sites. Yep.
Remind us our megawatt usage.
Our total peak is about 2.3 megawatts. So overall in the year, it's about 11,000 megawatt hours.
So in addition to landfills, there's a lot of sort of medium-sized or community scale projects that are all around Maine. I won't spend a lot of time because I'm sure a lot of you have seen some of them. Here's one in Acton, Maine. That's a 4.2 megawatt. It opened in 2021. And this one serves the Brunswick-Topsom Water District, the Freeport-Durham School District, and the town of Yarmouth. So there's a track record for these smaller scale projects delivering power to smaller communities and allowing them to have completely renewable power in their towns.
Mm-hmm.
And here's one I drove by last week. Some of you may have seen this. The Maine DOT actually had a very interesting use of their interchange, the cloverleaf areas in between the entrance and exit ramps. They took 3 of the interchanges, exit 109 and 112, and put in 8 megawatts of solar there. There was a bit of a controversy over a lack of planning board review. I didn't realize the DOT's right-of-way projects didn't need local permitting, but they also use Canadian solar panels, which are made in China. So there was a bit of controversy about that, but I thought it was a really sensible use of, again, otherwise unusable land. Okay, so let's turn to rooftop. So most of you know rooftop solar has exploded in the last 20 years around the United States. It's currently about 3.5% of US energy production, just rooftop solar. There's about 5% of all homes in the US now have rooftop solar. There's about 2% on Vinyl Haven.
How about you?
About
Yeah.
that. And it's 20% in Germany. To just contrast the two. Most of them use conventional monocrystalline panels, like we talked about earlier. They're glass. They're reasonably heavy, and it costs about $3, $3.10 a watt. So the typical house that has a 6 kilowatt system, it's about $17,000 or $18,000. An alternative, so these are the PV panels go on racks on the roof, and most of you are familiar with that, I'm sure. An alternative that's come out in the last few years are solar PV shingles. So these are coming out. They're made by GAF and CertainTeed, which are big asphalt shingle companies that have gotten into this. Some of you may know that Tesla came out with a bunch of roof shingles that generate power. That's the good news. I always thought that was my fantasy, that they would have shingles. I could just re-roof my house with shingles and it would generate power. That's the good news. The bad news is that they cost about $20 to $25 a square foot. So it costs about $55,000 for a typical roof. So that's not in my budget. And the other thing is, to finish up on rooftop, they're most effective when paired with a battery system, but we're going to talk about that shortly. And now Amy's going to talk about net metering.
Yes, and I'm just gonna look at the questions. How many of them are north, how many rooftop solars installations are in North Haven? What's the percentage of that? We do have that data, but I don't have it in front of me, so I couldn't tell you. The 2% is between the two islands.
Yeah.
So I'd have to go through by accounts and separate those out, and I don't have those numbers right now. But I certainly can. If someone would like to do that, you can just email customerservice@foxislands.net, and I can give you a percentage of that. Before we go to net metering, to your question too, I wanted to mention it's not just the rating of the solar. So if we have that 1.1 megawatt solar, it doesn't mean that it's going to generate 1.1 megawatts when it's running. It's the capacity factor that comes in. Do they run at 35% capacity, 40% capacity? And that all depends on the solar energy that you're actually getting, what, weather, cloud. So when I look at 2.3 megawatts, our peaking power, we can't just do two of these solar, 1.2, 1.1 and have all of our supply. We'd actually probably have to do about 10 of those that size to even get close to meeting it. And then it's intermittent. So we wouldn't be able to generate it when we need it. So you have to store it with the battery. It's an incredible large amount of acreage.
We'll be talking about that.
So yes, actually we are. George is later on. But I just wanted to clarify that because you'd asked what our peak was. So we will talk about that. Thank you. This is great. I've actually had a little bit of a break today. Wonderful. So we're going to talk about the net energy metering. And this is where solar gets a little controversial because it's cost to the cooperative. So how this works with a rooftop solar, a customer installs solar panels on their roof, and then a DC to AC converter that's with their system, and it supplies the energy used in the home. And then the extra energy goes to the power grid that's operated by Fox Islands Electric. And then when the home needs energy, just as now, it receives power. So yes, the excess power is sent to Fox Islands Electric. When you need power, power is received from Fox Islands Electric. So the meter there is a two-way meter. But I do want to point out that people talk about how the solar panels on your roof actually make your meter go backwards. It doesn't do that. What it does is it records both. It records what is sent to Fox Islands Electric and what is received from Fox Islands Electric. And then on your bill, it nets out. So let's go to the next one. Right here, you see that it's a 2-direction kilowatt hour. On a residential home that's not net metered, that's just a 1-direction meter. All it does is record the energy coming from Fox Islands Electric to the customer. The solar meter is a special meter that records it both ways. So at the end of the month, when we read the actual official read for billing, we get two numbers: how much is delivered, how much is received from the customer, and then we get the net. And the net is what the energy is billed. On solar customers, when they get their bill, they will see the readings at the top of the bill. And then those are the readings for the month that are used in the billing.
That number of time, I know we talked last time about sometimes we're paying more for it.
Yeah, it is credit for credit, and it nets out. So that is where it gets into the issue. So what is the real key issue? If customers delivering you a kilowatt hour and the company delivers one back, why is that an issue? Shouldn't it be a complete offset? Well, it's because the homeowner receives the kilowatt hour credit at whatever the fixed price is for the utility that month. It's not per hour that they do it. It's a 1-to-1 offset. Most of the energy delivered by net metering customers is delivered 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. During that time of day. And that's usually off-peak power. But when the customer needs energy, it's during the peak time. And the peak time is the more expensive time because that's where there's more demand on the system. So Fox Islands Electric loses money selling the solar power at midday. If Fox Islands Electric receives that kilowatt hour but can't use it in its system, it has to deliver that extra power to ISO New England market. And we lose money when we do that. We lose it in line losses, and we also just lose it on market price. So then we also lose money delivering power when the ISO New England market prices are at peak times. So it's a lose-lose situation when it comes to power costs. The customers, if the customer's net credit zeroes out on the bill, they're not paying for any kilowatt hours that month, which means they're not paying anything towards delivery fees. They're not paying the difference in power costs between what they generated and what was delivered to them. They're not paying the low income assessment program or the main efficiency trust regulatory fees, and they're not paying state sales tax either on it. So they're basically paying their $15 a month customer charge, and that's it. Now, extra kilowatt hours generated, they get to bank those and roll them over towards future months for a calendar year. So what happens with these costs? Somebody has to pay them. We are a nonprofit member-owned cooperative. We don't have investors that make up the lack of money. All those lost costs are then folded into the energy prices and redistributed to the other customers. So I have an example of this. On February 21st of this year, I don't know if anyone remembers this day. It was actually fake spring. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining. It was like 40 degrees, a rare day in February that everyone just gets out and turns your face to the sun. It was beautiful. It also means that it was a low energy use day on ISO New England. There wasn't a high heating load, and it really was such a nice day. The power cost actually didn't go over $70 a megawatt hour. So that's really a beautiful temperate day in February where we have low power costs on the system. So between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., where Fox Islands Electric would receive most of that solar power, on the market, you see there's a dip there in power costs. During that time, it was about 25 to 26 cent power from the market. That's when Fox Islands Electric was receiving the most rooftop solar. So it was also the time where we couldn't really use that. So we were selling any extra energy to the market. So between 5 and 8 p.m. is where we peaked too. You can see that higher hill on the right side of the chart. That's when we peaked, and that's also when ISO New England, the energy market, peaked. And that was almost $42 to almost $70 a megawatt hour. And that is when we sold most of the energy on our system. So that's when we were delivering energy to the net metering customers. So with that one-to-one offset, we were receiving a 25 cent or $25 megawatt. So it actually is 2.5 cents. And we were delivering a 4.17, so almost 4.2 cent power. So on this one day, beautiful day when power costs are low, Fox Islands Electric was still losing 1.6 to 4.3 cents on every kilowatt hour received from a net metering customer. So this loss at the end of the month, when we get all of our February costs in, we take these losses and the loss gets added to our line losses, and it gets all that money has to be paid by somewhere. So it gets included in the lump sum and then paid by all the customers. So to put this into a comparison, we have your typical residential customer taking service from Fox Islands Electric, not rooftop solar, regular customer. They're using 500 kilowatt hours. They're paying a customer charge of $15, a delivery charge, And that is the overhead that covers Fox Island's electric services and costs and everything that goes into providing service on the system: poles, wires, insurance, labor, vehicles, fuel, all of that. They pay $68.54. The transmission fee, the cost just to get that market power here, is $3.67. The low income assessment program, this is money that gets paid into the state, and then is some of it, about 20% of it, comes back to our low income citizens here to help with their energy bills, was $1.83. Energy conservation goes to fund Maine Efficiency Trust. This is a regulatory fee. It's $1.73. And then the energy charge, this is the 16-cent energy charge that we had for that 500 kilowatt hours, is $84.41. So an average customer of 500 kilowatts is $175.18. The residential net metering customer that uses 500 kilowatt hours, but also generates it and nets out to zero, has those same services. They deliver, actually they use our system in two ways. They deliver power to us to sell it, and they also to receive it, to use it. They don't pay the delivery charge, transmission, low income energy conservation, or any energy charge. They pay a $15 a month. So what does this mean? It means that a net metering customer passes $75.77 in non-energy costs, the overhead of the company, and up to $21.74 in energy costs, based on our last slide, to other customers. So in 1 month, it's almost $100 that's divvied up and put in the pot for other customers to pay. Those costs of service have to get paid by the other customers. So our average net meter generation from 20 to 2023, last year, the yellow line you can see in 2023, do you remember that July, August foggy weather that we had? It was kind of rainy last summer. Wasn't really a great weather summer. You can see that the solar net meter generation dipped down during that time. So you can see from January to December, kind of this arc, with the majority of the power really being developed, as George pointed out, in July and August. Net metering customers, by using this, they can take their unused credits and forward them to use them in months that they don't generate as much. So the effect is this red line. This is the energy that they use. It creates almost an even power cost across all 12 months, and they can use their system to power their energy needs across 12 months in a very even way, because they're banking energy to use it later. This also means that in the summertime, when we have some warm, temperate days that are right in the middle, not real hot, because then energy gets expensive again because of air conditioning and high loads on the system, they can use what they generate then and offset expensive winter peak power. So the differences in delivery have been up to 17 to 18 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on when the energy is banked and when it is used.
But it's the credit that's banked, not the actual electrons.
Yeah, yes. The actual electrons are not banked. It's just the credit. It's the kilowatt hour credit that you get. So essentially what net metering does is the customer uses Fox Island's electric as their personal battery, not a battery on the house. We're going to talk about that. They use the system to use energy when they need to. So that is a service that's provided, that our rates need to reflect that service and to charge on that service. And per state law, we really don't have the mechanisms to do it now. So what does this mean for our customers? What are we talking about? In 2020, the overall cost that was put into the pot for other customers to pay, that was shifted from net metering to non-net metering, was $28,989. From 2020 to 2023, there was a big increase in rooftop solar last year in 2023, the shifted cost, and this is based on a very low to average conservative cost of 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Very likely, if I broke this down and did 24 hours a day and matched it for 365 days over 4 years, the cost would be higher. That's an incredible amount of work. So I did a lot of data extrapolation and averages to get to this, and it's a very conservative number. As you can see, it's a significant shift from one set of customers to another set of customers. And we're consistently getting more and more net metered rooftop solar on our system. Our entire margin, the difference between providing service and our revenue, is only $125,000. We operate on a very slim margin each year. As this creeps up, we have to increase rates to make up for this shortfall and pass this amount over to other customers. We're nonprofit. We don't have any, we either borrow money to make up for this gap or we raise rates. Yes.
So, even though George got me all excited to go put rooftop solar on my house.
I just crushed your dream.
By doing that, I'd have to understand that I'm really hurting financially my neighbors.
Yes.
I'm getting a pitchfork and a sport.
Well, exactly. We're getting this more support for some of us that have solar panels on, so I think it would be perhaps helpful to point out that this is something that's regulated by the PUC and
Yeah.
has to be changed at the state level.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
One presentation to encourage people to not put on rooftop solar.
Mm-hmm.
It's a statewide regulation.
Mm-hmm.
The co-op, as I understand it, has been working for an extended period of time to get that regulation changed. And perhaps with conversations with the PUC or whoever's in developing those regulations, that's not going to change them. It could be changed for consumer-owned cooperatives as opposed to Vanguard.
Mm-hmm.
But just so that it's understood that it's a state level
Yes.
regulation, not something that those of us who use top solar are doing to insult our neighbors.
Yes, and actually that's a great segue to my next comments. So a lot of these, I will call on you in just a second because I would like to respond to this, and it's a perfect segue to my. Yes, okay.
This is a direct follow-up.
Okay.
Two specific charges that you indicated are required by, is it state law or federal law?
Yes, this is state law.
It is state law, and it's in statute, not in regulations. Am I correct about that?
It's in statute, and then there are regulations that flesh out some of the details of the statute.
So is there any effort to modify the statute in the legislature so that it's not left up to just the discretion of the PUC in their rulemaking? And because if you could base those charges, at least in part, on something other than the amount of electricity used, you could mitigate this problem.
Mhm.
The problem arises because it's tied to electric usage.
Yes. So both of these comments are a great segue to my next comments. My first comment is when we started with rooftop solar, it wasn't state law first. And state law with the one-to-one offset was created to encourage rooftop generation. It wasn't really known what the impact would be on local utility companies, investor-owned utilities, or at the end of the day, what was really going to happen financially. If you looked at history, PURPA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Procedure Act, PURPA, Policies Act. Anyway, that was a 1970s law that really didn't make a lot of difference until the turn of the century. And then it was revived and a lot of generators started using that law. And it wasn't really predicted that that law that allowed for up to 80 megawatts of independent generation to have interconnection rights to utilities would even be used It was initially to encourage these, but no one really used it until it was financially feasible to start doing it. At the time that rooftop solar was put in and people started using it, it really didn't have a huge effect that it has today. It's really been a law of unintended consequences. California recently changed their net metering law to address a lot of these issues, and they're doing more of an avoided cost, one-to-one power at the time it's delivered charge. And it really is kind of shutting down the rooftop solar industry. So I'm not really sure what's going to happen in California. But really what we're looking at, what we're seeing is that these installations are, with unintended consequences, having an impact on local utilities. So I'm going to urge not to do pitchforks. What we're doing though, and I have not been involved in lobbying for changes to these laws. I don't know if my predecessor was. I'm not going to speak to him. But I would, as running and managing Fox Islands Electric, I would like customers of this consumer-owned utility to generate if they want to. If they want to self-generate, I think customers should have the option to do that, with the goal in mind of creating a rate structure that each customer that connects and uses the system pays for their fair share of the system. We're all in this together. If it increases like this, pretty soon, those low-income people who cannot afford to put solar on their roof are going to be hit with the brunt of the cost of running the company. And I don't think anyone here agrees that that's the right way to go. We have to have a utility system that is affordable for our community, for everyone in our community. So I think what we're going to be looking at the first step we took was putting in a metering system that can tell me what the load is hour by hour, that we can actually look at what our demand is. How much solar are we getting delivered at times where we can't use it, that we have to sell it? What are those actual costs? What are we looking at our system? What is our peak? How are we offsetting that? How are we charging it? If we looked at, we're going to be looking at a demand charge. On our peak demands, which usually hits about 6:30 to 7 each night, how is each customer using our system at that time? Allocating overhead costs based on that. It costs about $70 a month for every residential customer just to have a meter there. That's just per meter. That's the cost of our system on our most recent cost of service study. So how do we use that information we have? How do we use the technology we have to restructure our rates in a way that's more equitable for all of our customers? Another thing that we're doing that I'm going to touch on slightly is, because we've talked about it at our last meeting or the meeting before that, I can't remember, they're all running together, about a utility scale battery. If we could store extra energy on our system and redeliver it at the same cost, that would make a big difference too. So I'm throwing out this problem that, yes, this is an issue for our very small utility. The more and more utility rooftop solar we have, the more it compromises the finances of the cooperative. But that is not aimed at any customers that put it on before, that have it now, that want to put it on now. But it is a financial issue that we need to look at, making our rates more equitable and using the tools we have available through the Public Utilities Commission and through state law to do that. Yeah.
This will be a popular suggestion. Currently, the membership, the monthly fee, I think it's still such that for some it's $15 a month, for others
For 40.
Would it not be possible to identify those who have solar PV panels as being we have a third category and pay at a different monthly rate, make up some of those fees?
Well,
couldn't that be done regardless of the state statute?
we can't discriminate against similarly situated classes of customers. And so we can't pull out net metering customers and specifically charge them differently from other residential customers under state law right now.
But we do that now, right?
We only do that seasonal versus non-seasonal. So seasonal, when you use most of your power just in the summertime, it's a $40 a month charge. And then if you're year round, it's a $15 a month charge. There are utilities that are just increasing that monthly fee to $65, $70 because then they just collect all the revenue they need in an equitable way. But there's been a lot of managers fired for doing those kinds of policies too, because that disproportionately affects your low income customers who are very low users too. So we can't discriminate against classes of customers to do that. Although a lot of solar customers have offered, can I just come in and pay $100 a month? Can I make up that difference for you? Can I just donate it in a way? And we really have to receive our revenue through rates. So, but I can't discriminate against certain classes of customers and how they use it. Because if I have a rooftop solar customer who has a battery that offsets their peak every day, I'm not incurring that cost. So it's a good suggestion, and I think we need to look and think creatively about how we do this to make it equitable for everybody. Yes.
What do you do about, let's say, summer residents, seasonal residents that have rooftops or ground mounted solar, and they don't use all of the electricity that they produce?
Mm-hmm.
They're giving that back to you guys. How do you calculate that? And then there are other people that have them year round, but maybe burning wood, and at the end of their year, their meter goes back to zero, and then they start gaining credit for the rest of the year.
Yes, so it is on a calendar year basis, and whatever at the end of your calendar year, whatever's left in your bank is forfeited. These costs right here include a credit for those forfeit. So it's the cost minus that forfeit amount. So this includes the credit for the average cost of power that is retained by the cooperative. Beginning this year, that average cost of power, we have to pay that into the state for the low income program. So it's actually going to be an additional loss on outlay because we have to do it at the average cost of power, even though that's not the value of the power that we received. So beginning this year, we're going to have to pay, I think it's right around $22 some thousand into that fund at the end of 2024. Okay, I know this was a heavy discussion, so I'm going to pass it back to George.
All right.
And we'll answer questions after.
So what we're going to do next, 15 to 20 minutes max. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through two case studies here. One is rooftop solar, and we're going to throw in a rooftop solar with battery. And then we're going to look at ground mount, and we're going to compare them. And then we're going to basically end at that point because we're just trying to give all of you information that we're coming up with and the studies we're doing just to get our arms around what are the issues, what are the decisions we're going to have to make, and what are the best paths forward. So let's take a quick look at rooftop solar. And some of the folks online and here already have rooftop solar, so you're familiar with a lot of this. What we did was we modeled a typical 5,600 watt system, which is for the typical co-op customer that has perhaps 6,000 kilowatt hours per year of consumption. And we assumed that they use the current 310 watt panels that Revision Energy and companies like that are providing for most rooftops. And there's a number of models that are run. There's PV Watts and PV GIS and PV Sys. I've used all of those to just take a look at the numbers. And then we had benchmark comparison with some folks that graciously provided us with their actual generation data from Vinyl Haven. So we have a pretty good sense that these are realistic numbers. So what we're looking at here is a chart showing the monthly generation from this 5,600 watt rooftop system. And this is on Vinyl Haven, but North Haven would be comparable. And as you expect, the generation drops. So the red is the actual generation. The red is the actual generation from this rooftop system. And as expected, it drops in the wintertime when the days are shorter and it peaks in the summertime. The blue line is the typical load or demand of that household. And it varies from 300 to 750 kilowatt hours per month. And you can see that in the wintertime, they're not generating enough power to meet their demand, but in the summertime, they have excess power being generated. So any of the red that's above the blue line is power that would be delivered to the co-op and to be sold or used. And the green areas are the shortfall. And that's where the co-op has to deliver power to that household. Now that's a little bit simplistic because the sun doesn't stay lit 24/7 for an entire month. So we need to look at hourly generation. And there's a lot of data behind this chart. So what this is showing basically is, here's January. This is rooftop generation in January. And the hourly generation is in red, once again. And the household demand is in blue. So you can see there's a little morning peak, and then there's a bigger peak in the evening when everybody's cooking dinner and doing laundry. And unfortunately, in January in particular, the rooftop generation doesn't match up with the peak demand. So obviously, if you had a battery, you could store that power and use it in the evening. Here's June. So in June, we have longer days. So there's more power generated for a longer period of time. And so you might generate an extra 30 or 40 kilowatt hours during the day, more than the house needs. So that power could be sent to the co-op. But the morning and the evening peak demands still don't match the actual generation. And once again, with a battery, you could actually store that power and use it later. But let's take a look at the financials of all of this. So again, we modeled a 5,600 watt rooftop system. Today, it would be about 17,000, a little more than 17,000 to have that fully installed. There's a 30% federal tax credit still available for rooftop solar, so that subtracts over 5,000. So the net investment for this kind of system is just over $12,000. And if we're and this assumes that this is a typical average co-op household, and it assumes net metering as it's currently defined by the state, as Amy just went through. So the savings, power savings, is around $2,400 per household. This is, again, the typical household. So at about $2,400 of savings per year, it takes about 6 years if you had a 5% loan to pay off the system. If you generate more power, you might be able to pay it off faster. If you generate less power, it would take a little longer, but that's an average figure. Obviously, if there are changes to metering laws, it could change or extend that payback period. And that's what's happened in California. When California went to net metering 3.0, which is the new one, that got put in place last April, thanks. There was a dramatic drop, more than 75% drop in rooftop installations. And the payback periods are doubling. So they're about 12 years.
Which, if I can interrupt, too, total annual savings, if you're passing $100 worth of costs to your neighbors each month, that does $1,200 cuts that in half. So it takes you to a 12-year payback for your system.
So let's take a look for a minute at battery storage with rooftop. So last month, we talked about the pros and cons of battery storage for the co-op, large scale batteries. And that's where we were storing the unneeded power for later use. And if you have a battery system in your home connected to a solar system, you're allowed, you basically can take more of the power you're generating and use it yourself. And that provides a solution, partial solution, to the co-op, because it doesn't have to sell as much of the excess power at a loss during the sunny midday. And it might need to deliver less power to you in the evening because you've got your own power stored in the battery system. And there's still 30% tax credits available for batteries. So there's a very competitive market now for battery systems. There's been a lot of manufacturers that have come onto the market. Tesla, SunPower, Sonnencore, Enphase, they're all jumping into this because it's an exploding market. In California now, for new construction, as I understand it, they're requiring rooftop solar for all new construction of single and multifamily homes, and they're requiring battery systems with all of those. So, and there are outdoor battery systems available now. Some people have been concerned about having these battery storage systems inside their house. They're worried about fires, etc. Now there are outdoor battery storage systems that are being developed. So there are more options. So here, let's take a look at what happens with a battery system. Here's the same June production that we looked at before. Red is the generation, blue is the demand. And again, you're not matching your demand period. But if you took that power in pink and stored it, then you're able to meet more of your evening peak demand. And here's what it looks like financially. The same system, 17,000 plus for your rooftop system. If you add a Powerwall, I'm not advertising for Tesla here, but this is just an example, costs about $11,500 installed for one of these Tesla Powerwalls. I think the others are probably comparable. And you have a 30% tax credit for everything, including the battery. That drops the net investment to about $20,000. Same figures we used before. It's a 9-year payback at 5% loan. So instead of 6 years, you've got 9 years, including the battery. Okay, wrapping up, let's take a look at ground mount. And we're going to take a look at the Vinyl Haven landfill site. And the caveat here is this is simply a theoretical thought exercise. I'm not advocating that this is the solution, but it's sitting there, so we might as well consider it. So the town of Vinyl Haven owns a 5-acre capped landfill at the transfer station. There's a smaller facility on North Haven that's similar. And as a theoretical exercise, we modeled a ground mount system here to see what could it generate, what would it cost, how would it impact the system. And it gave us an idea of how much power a larger solar project could generate and what it would do for our entire system. So we talked before, landfill projects, solar projects are pretty common in Maine. There's a whole bunch of them. But there are a lot of steps involved. First of all, it's town-owned property, not co-op-owned property. So it would have to be an arrangement with the town, a lease. There would have to be a contract. There's state re-permitting involved because there was a permit to close the landfill and be able to have this cap. They had to go back through DEP permitting again to allow a solar project. There had to be financing. We'd have to get approval from the entire community. So there's a lot of steps involved here, but let's just take a look at what it would mean. So for this model, I only use the south facing and the flat sections of the landfill. The northern third of the landfill slopes to the north, and so it would be less favorable for solar generation. So this diagram is basically a Google Earth shot of the landfill site. And those are all the panel arrays that will be put in place. And when we ran this model, we used the latest generation 600-watt panels. And it would fit about 2,100, 2,150 panels. So over 2,000 panels would fit there. Contrast that with 15 to 20 panels that fit on a roof. And it would generate, it would be about a 1.45 megawatt system. So that's equivalent to one of the wind turbines. And it would generate about 1.85 million kilowatt hours per year, or about 18% of the whole co-op demand. So here's what it would look like in terms of monthly generation. Not surprising, you know, peaks in the summer, not so much in the winter, drops off in the fall. But again, it would be generating most in the late spring and summer. And the benefit is that's when our wind power generation is at its lowest. So it could help balance the system. So let's look at the finances. So a 1.4 megawatt project on the landfill would cost about 3 million. And it would generate about 1.85 million kilowatt hours. So the savings, we'd have rec sales, there'd be some transmission savings of not having to buy as much power from the mainland. We have less line loss associated with that. So our estimated savings would, be about 35,000 a year. That's not huge, but that's not the purpose of it. If we financed it at 5% over 20 years, that would work out to a power cost of about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. And there's some operation costs in there, insurance and maintenance, things like that, but that's a good ballpark. And that's if we just financed it. But there are grants and low interest loans out there. And if we can land one of those, it could drop the cost to 4 or 5, 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is very attractive. So again, here's what the monthly, sorry, I just want to contrast the landfill or a ground mount system. And I should say, this is just the same kind of system could be built on any 5-acre site. We just need to have flat, relatively flat, clear, no trees, could be a farm area, could be almost any open space. But just the concept of a 1.4 or 1.5 megawatt ground solar system. Here's what it generates per month. And the generation fluctuates over the year. It peaks in the summer. And here's the key. This is the same power production in yellow, but the blue bars represent how many 5,600 watt rooftop PV systems it would take to match it. So to produce the same amount of power from the ground mount, we would need to add about 350 more rooftop solar projects between the two communities. That's 1 out of every 4 houses. And some houses aren't appropriate because they're facing the wrong way. And if net metering is still in place and we went to 350 more houses, even fewer non-solar customers would have to bear the cost of all of the rest of the distribution system and operations unless net metering is changed. Last slide. There's a big price difference. Remember the slide earlier that we looked at cost per watt of a rooftop at about $3 a watt and a ground mount at about $1 a watt because of the economy of scale? This chart compares the co-op's total cost of power. That's having to basically credit or buy the power from rooftop projects versus generating its own power. And it compares the total cost each month for a landfill, which is in yellow, with another 350 rooftop systems in blue. And this assumes the current net metering. The monthly power costs to the co-op for rooftop solar would be 3 times the cost of a ground mount system. Now, having battery storage for all those rooftop systems would help reduce that loss that the co-op incurs every time it has to sell power at low peak times and buy power at peak times. But in terms of the actual costs passed through to the customers and their bills, a ground mount system would be far more economical in a cost per watt than 350 more PV systems on roofs. So that's really where I wanted to end this analysis. I don't have a conclusion other than there's a lot more that we need to look at. There's a lot of more data we're going to have to evaluate. And we're going to be doing a lot more analysis in the months ahead to look at this. But these are the kinds of things we're looking at. And the question, we have lots of questions, just like all of you do. Anyway,
There's a question over here and then here.
Wonder about as a additional generating capacity here, how that affects the exchange with grid in one local. if there's a,
Repeat the question.
generating enough that CMP gets it out of the way.
Mhm. So the question is, what is the impact of generating more on the island? And that's a question we've had it a couple times talking about. In all of our modeling, it shows that it is beneficial to generate more on the island because we avoid the lost power of our transmission, we avoid the CMP transmission, we avoid the ISO New England energy market transmission and fluctuating peak costs. So having a solar that generates when our wind turbines kind of lull in the summer, having a solar facility on island does reduce some of those costs. It would be beneficial, I think. But how beneficial is where we're trying to drill into that data.
That's the point, but scale, where it has a negative impact on the financial transaction.
Mhm. Oh, the scale of that much net metering on the customers. Sorry. Okay. Okay, why don't we go to this and then maybe we'll flesh this out a little bit.
Driving across New England a few times a year, for years now.
Mhm.
Every 6 months, I see a new solar farm somewhere. So based on that, they must be widely considered as a good investment.
I think the grant money out there and the low interest loans make it a good investment. I think there are some companies, like Duke Energy is buying a lot of these small scale solar. So you have generation companies putting them together and then selling them, doing some energy trading. A lot of that plays into it, where we wouldn't really be part of that other than in the renewable energy market.
Is it really Maine that PUC changed the rules to really encourage those?
Yeah.
They went too far, basically, and they're trying to roll things back.
So that's where the distribution generation market comes in, and the state law and the PUC law, it is very favorable to these systems. And you can lock in a price that's much higher than the value of the power now. And all of that is a reason why the CEP price, the competitive energy provider price in the state of Maine, and the standard offer price with CMP and Versant has gone from 8 cents to 18 cents. It's that money that's built in. So maybe it's a good investment for the investor, but not for the customers. Maybe that's the way to characterize it, where as we're looking at it not as an investor, but as a community of ratepayers and owners of this company. And we're not looking for the return on equity. We're not looking to lock in those higher rates with the state. We're looking for something that makes financial sense for us. So if we can make that investment make financial sense for this community, I think we will. But I think your point is really well taken. Somebody's making money on these. They are a good investment, but maybe not a good investment for the ratepayers. Yes.
What do we pay kilowatt?
It ranges each month. We have a pass-through energy rates. At the end of the month, we take the Fox Islands wind and what that generated, we take our diesel generator, and then we take our energy market from ISO New England. We take those bills and we put them in the pot, and we have to allocate our line losses from the transmission. So we always have to buy more than we can deliver. And then we take our line losses from the rooftop solar and the rollover credits, and then we divide that by the billable that we have, the billable kilowatt hours, and that's what it is each month.
What's the rate?
And well, it depends. It depends on the year. Last year, the range was in 2023, I think it was 13 or 14 cents to 19 cents. That was the range. And I do have that data, not with me tonight, but the power costs each month on what that is. And then I've broken it down to what is the power cost from the market versus Fox Islands Wind, and where's the transmission each month. The transmission and the energy costs flow through on actual basis each month. And then we have a little true up the next month because we get those costs and then sometimes they shift before the actuals are in place. So it just ranges, which is a good rate to have, because we don't have to put a cushion in there to hedge against what might happen, which is what the investor-owned utilities have to do. They can't just do a what flows in, flows out model. They have to hedge it, and they have to decide. They watch natural gas prices, they look at all these different things, and then they have to kind of bolster it up a little bit to make sure they still make profits and they make those costs, because they set their rates 1 year at a time.
So ours is 13 to 19 cents.
It is,
Okay.
depending on the month. That's what it was in 2023. In December, it was 16 cents. In January, it was 18 cents. I've not calculated it for February yet.
More of a comment than question. I think that one piece that's difficult to quantify is that, for example, if we were to generate more from either windmills or solar, that's energy that's not being generated by fossil fuels.
Yes. Yes. And when you look at it from the climate perspective, that gets you into the discussion of the value of something, not just the cost of something. So right now, the more we can get out of the wind turbines, and if we could get parts on time, which would be great. I'm about ready to barter with chickens. Not really, but the getting parts right now is really difficult, and they've been delayed a lot longer than what would even be considered reasonable before COVID. The more we can get out of the turbines and the more they generate, it's the more value as far as in wind generation that we get on the system, but it's also more effective in the cost. We have cheaper energy as the more we generate. So it's two different questions. It really is. There are a few questions online. How much does one wind turbine cost versus a solar panel array over the landfill, especially as wind turbines work better in the winter?
I can answer that. So at this point, a 1.5 meg, well, most of the wind turbines now are much bigger than 1.5 megawatts, but in terms of their output, not necessarily their size. But if you had a comparable output turbine, they're slightly more expensive than a solar array. There's more moving parts, there's more maintenance involved. The construction of a wind project is a little more complicated than putting in a solar farm, as those of you who were here when ours was built know. So there is a higher cost, unit cost for a turbine versus a comparable amount of solar arrays. But they will, as the question raised, they do generate more power in the winter than a solar array. But as we mentioned earlier, the wind projects develop less power, generate less power in the summer than a solar array. So there's that balancing thing. So I think it would end up probably being comparable if one looked at an entire year's worth of generation measured against the unit cost of those megawatts. One's generating a lot in the winter, less in the summer. One's generating less in the winter, more in the summer. And I think, it may be that a combination makes sense. But that's the kind of thing we're going to have to really look at closely and see if it makes sense economically for all of us.
There's a couple questions online I'd like to answer real quick, if you don't mind. One, carbon offsets need to be part of the cost equation. And that was something that we just talked about too. Today, we have really just focused on the dollars and cents, the cost. We haven't really talked about the value too much. And that is going to be part of this whole discussion as we dig into it. Is there any way that Fox Islands Electric can recoup carbon offsets from the states? Not that I am aware of in the existing regulatory structure, although we do sell our renewable energy credits, which is a significant portion of the revenue that the wind farm receives each year. Last year was over $200,000 in selling renewable energy credits that came in. That offsets the cost, the power cost that the community pays. I should have brought my glasses, excuse me. We did talk about, oh, and there was a comment, the public advocate comes to North Haven in the summer. Yes, Bill Harwood has a house on North Haven, and I am the consumer and utility representative on the Electric Ratepayers Council for the state of Maine. So I know Bill very well, and I've worked with him on several issues, specifically when it comes to the low income issues and LIAP funding in the states. And there's definitely a statewide conversation about net metering that's occurring. This is not an issue that's unique to us. It's not something that we're alone in battling. And the disproportionate impact that it has on low income customers is definitely an issue that we've been talking about. I think Bill does a fantastic job as the public advocate, and I'm glad that he's one of our members. Is there any way we could use smart meters to help with this problem? Yes, that is our first step to working with this problem, is to put in the new metering system. And they're not, they are AMI meters, and they only ping 6 times a day, and it's just a very, very tiny, small pulse. But the data that's in that pulse is going to allow us to do things like demand billing, time of use billing. If we can all shift our use away from peak power, we save everybody money on that. There's different tools that the system has that our old system didn't, and that is one of the foundations, one of the first steps we've taken to even start tackling some of these big issues.
Excuse me,
Yes.
if you were to do that, would that affect what the rate that this person who had rooftops
It would.
sell? So the solar that they sold during the daytime, when the prices were high.
Well, a time of use might getting into that would need a state law to change the 1-to-1 kilowatt hour. But what it would do is a demand charge would look at everybody's portion of the peak demand at nighttime and would allocate fixed costs to the co-op based on that. So earlier with that chart up there with rooftop solar customers not paying any delivery charges, they would pay a demand charge. It would change from a kilowatt hour basis to a services basis. It would see what is the value of the services that the customers are paying or are receiving. And so it would be a change in the rates, kind of away from the kilowatt hour and more towards like your use of the poles and the wires. So it's a shift in the thinking. So it would have more equity based on how people are using the system, and it would increase costs to the net metering customers, increase rates to them.
It seems to me a more equal way to bill is to have a $70 a month charge that covers the co-op cost of running the co-op. That would take the 2% of the people who have the PV on the roof, and it would charge the summer people the real cost of their electricity instead of the big break that they get subsidized by all of the year-round people.
If we did just base the monthly fee and include all of our fixed costs in it, and everyone paid a $70, that would probably be the easiest way to go. Politically, I'm not sure that the Maine Public Utilities Commission would approve something like that. I mean, it's a pretty radical move, but it does equally split the costs between all the customers, because just the value, technically the value of that meter, that's what it is. That's how much it costs to serve each customer, each residential, each month.
That would kind of discourage energy conservation, because I mean, people that are trying to cut their costs and including their distribution or delivery costs, would essentially be subsidizing people that's
in it. Yes, there's that. And there's also low income that live in apartment dwellings that they have a bank of meters. So what does it cost to serve them a month? It's really a rate making issue that is pretty complex. But we kind of start at that. What is our cost? At least we know what our cost is to serve each meter.
But there'd still be an electricity charge.
Yes.
It wouldn't be
Yes.
just the exclusive charge.
Yeah, no, that would just cover the delivery and the basic, everything that the utility provides. So, are we getting a battery through the Investment Recovery Act? That's a good question. We have definitely looked at that. We have put in a letter of intent for the New Era grant loan program that's specifically for cooperatives through the Investment Recovery Act. We are looking at all those opportunities. As of today, we don't have any indication of what we might be successful with, but we're going to keep trying. I think we have a really neat community here that's trying to do some very advanced things for our small size. And I think we have great projects. We're just trying to get other people on board and get some funding. Yes.
I was wondering, audible do hydrogen?
I have kind of looked at that. I think that the technology is not advanced enough for the federal funding, but I hope so. I've seen some really interesting things about hydrogen cells. I put hydrogen in that category of let's resolve these issues today, and then for the next phase, you know, what that might look like. So as we build a strategic plan for the immediate future, we're looking at the next 5 to 7 years, and then versus the next phase after that.
That's a good segue into the next meeting.
Yes, it is. Actually, the next meeting we're going to be talking about load profile. Yes.
So if I wanted to have solar, but my house faces the wrong direction or I live in the woods, could the landfill be a community solar thing where you bought in instead of having your personal panels?
We've definitely looked at that structure. The community solar provides a great way for people to invest in the project and then receive the benefits from it directly in a way like a subscriber program. Yeah. I think if we fall short with loan and grant opportunities and all, I think that might be a discussion that we'd like to have with the community and to see if we can get enough subscribers to build it.
I like that.
So I think it's definitely an option. There is a comment here, and I think it's a very good one, we should say. As a customer with rooftop solar and batteries, I just want to be sure that we capture energy and store it, and we use our banked energy during peak times, which actually delivers a benefit to Fox Mountains Electric. We so support your basic proposition that everyone should be paying their fair share. And this, I've had some of these great conversations with customers that recognize that. And it really does limit the value or the loss of the rooftop. If they program their batteries and use it at an optimal time, that really helps the co-op. So I'm glad that comment was in there. How much does one turbine cost versus a solar panel? Oh yes, you already did. Okay, there was one here. There's one here somewhere that said, why can't we get wind turbines that work? And I asked myself the same question. We are really working on getting maintenance schedule, part replacements, and things to get the most value out of these turbines. There have been kind of a series of unfortunate events, if you will, with failures to get parts and things that should have been replaced on schedule. There's many conversations that I've had with GE on how we're maintaining them and moving forward and how to extend the life of them. We really are seeing a lot of the same series turbine that are retiring after 15, 16 years. And we're at the 14-year mark. So there's a lot of conversations we're going to be having in the future and tough conversations on that. If we could be a microgrid that is self-sufficient, we'd also not be impacted by grid blackouts or brownouts. And we are moving towards that. We can't replace our transmission completely. We do need to be connected to ISO New England for that backup power, but we're looking at batteries and switching and how we can leverage certain assets to be as self-sufficient as possible. because we're seeing some economic advantages to doing that. And I think, did we answer everything? Oh, what's the difference between consumer-owned utilities and investor-owned utilities? Consumer-owned utilities are owned by the consumers, and it's in allocated shares of the company. I can actually tell you how much capital patronage you have. It's based on how much power you've purchased over the years. So what the value of your ownership of the company is. Investor-owned are owned by non-customers outside. They trade it like shares. Some of them are publicly traded. It's a third party that receives a return, like the return on equity and a profit from the business of the company. We don't have a profit. We have a margin, the difference between what it costs versus how much revenue we have. And that margin is actually allocated on a kilowatt hour basis to all of our customers. So in the equity is all divided up and owned by our members in the company.
So Amy, could I liquidate my stake in Fox Islands Electric in order to buy solar panels for my?
No, you actually can't. but we are right now, we're on a 37-year cycle, which I know is a lot. So basically we return that equity to customers after a certain amount of time. And if you look at it, it's like $5 1 year, $3. So we will retire an estate. We'll retire an estate at a discounted amount. But when you look at the investment in your utility, let's say last year you paid $7 more than you would have if you had just paid actual cost. That $7 of investment from our 2,000 members keeps us in business. It keeps the equity of the company. So a lot of people think, you know, they'll see an estate of a parent or grandparent or something come in and they get a check for $43. They're like, really? That's it? But we have $3 million in equity, and that $3 million in equity keeps us where we can loan money. We have assets. That equity is in our poles and our wires and our substation. It's in the value of our vehicles. It's in all the investment that each of our customers provide, actually for really just pennies a year. So the really big estates that we retire can sometimes be like $800–900, and that's over 30 some years. So yes.
I'm sorry, just one last question. So what if there was a big increase in people buying electric vehicles, not necessarily charging them with rooftop solar?
So there's a segue for this.
What would that kind of do to them? Would that be a benefit to the system?
That's
Obviously, you're
actually
buying a lot of power instead of gasoline.
That's actually a great place to switch to our next topic. In April, we're going to be talking about load and what that looks like and how we can project what we need in the future at our next meeting. So I hope we see you all then. If you have any questions, let us know. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Yes.